Energy Media readers, today we're going to be talking about Bill 1 that was just introduced not long ago in the Alberta legislature, and it deals with protesting, which is, of course, in the news because of the rail blockades and so on that have been going on across the country. To discuss this, we've got Jonathan Denis, who is the former Justice Minister and Attorney General of Alberta, and welcome to the interview, Jonathan.
Welcome. It's good to hear. Good to be here.
Now, you've had a chance to look at the bill. Why don't you give us an overview of what's in the bill?
Okay, so moments ago, Bill 1 was introduced in the legislature, and it was published on the website. I have a copy of it here. It's quite small. It's 4 pages. Most bills are much longer than that. I'm just going to go through the bill briefly with you. It has a very broad definition of what public infrastructure is, and it says specifically in Section 2, no person shall without lawful right, justification, or excuse willfully enter any essential infrastructure. And then on top of that, there are fines and penalties. The first offense, a fine of not less than $1,000, not exceeding $10,000, or an imprisonment term not exceeding 6 months. Now, this bill, as I mentioned to you earlier, was very hastily drafted. I have a source who tells me that they had intended a different Bill 1. Bill 1 is typically like a scholarship or rainbows and unicorns, things that everybody can agree on. It's very rare to see a substantive bill like this introduced as Bill 1.
Okay, why did the Premier introduce this bill at this time?
He obviously wants to send a very strong and public message that interference with economic relations and specifically blockading essential infrastructure like roadways or railways is not going to be tolerated. Another thing I'll point out here is Section 4. It says a peace officer may arrest without warrant any person the peace officer finds contravening one of the earlier sections. Now, again, that right already exists. If you run into a cop and the cop sees you doing something wrong, they don't need a warrant to go and arrest you. They can go in and arrest you. This is more about sending a political message to the illegal protesters, but also to I'd frankly say his conservative base.
Now, you were telling me earlier that the principle already exists, the laws already exist, that Canadians can't have the lawful right to protest and demonstrate, but there are restrictions on where they can demonstrate.
Yes, and I, like you, would completely agree with anyone's right to peaceful protest. Now, in Canada, there's very little legislation and there's very little case law compared to the United States on this topic. And this may create some. This may be challenged in court, although the provincial fines are within the constitutional guidelines. So moving forward here, in 1991, the Supreme Court stated that for purposes of communication, it has to be in a place that's intended for that, like the side of a road, like the legislature, the parliament buildings, city hall, in a public place, but not on a public roadway or a railway.
So run us through, what do you think would happen if this bill passes, sort of as is? I guess it hasn't been, it's only in first reading, hasn't been debated, hasn't been amended. But this passes, it really doesn't give the police any more powers to clear a illegal protest on a rail line, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. In fact, criminal code powers in Canada are exclusively federal under Section 91 of the Constitution. No province has any authority to regulate in that area. But what they're trying to do here is get in similar to a law of trespass and send a clear message to the extent that the province can that activities like this they don't want to tolerate.
So if I understand this correctly, the basic criminal laws don't change at all, but there are some additional potential fines and other penalties that the province could levy for people who are arrested and charged and convicted.
That's correct. And from my review of this under Section 3 of this bill, that is within the constitutional grounds of a province to regulate for provincial offenses. So obviously there's been some good legal minds that have taken a look at this.
Any other, anything that we should have talked about that we haven't talked about, Jonathan?
I suspect that this bill is going to be speedily passed, and the fact that Kenney himself is carrying this bill is designed to send the strongest message that this is a priority for his government. Of course, the bill has to be debated. I wouldn't be surprised if you see them even invoke closure and to try to get this thing passed as soon as possible, given the comments from the Premier.
Jonathan, thank you very much for this. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again in the near future about this bill and other issues, other news stories.
Thank you for having me, Markham.